I travel a lot for work. During one of these work trips, I met a friend and co-worker at General Mitchell International Airport in Milwaukee, William S. Vic Pettigrew was also on the trip. However, he came into town for a meeting the next day while I was just stuck here. "Hey, Grady, long time no see, buddy," my friend said as we met at baggage claim. "You mean you haven't seen each other since last Thursday?" I replied, raising one eyebrow, realizing that today was Tuesday, just 5 days after we last spoke through cubicle walls in Cary, North Carolina. "A whole life for a drinker," Vic answered without batting an eyelid. Vic, one of my best friends and classmates from college, and an old Kappa Alpha brother at NC State, works in the same department as me at Odyssey Corporation, a process engineering consulting firm located in Cary. So we share a workspace with 4 other engineers in the main office and sometimes cross paths when we travel. I'm happily married and have settled down a bit after my wild student days. Vic was not married and did not appear to be in a serious relationship with any of the many beautiful women with whom he was known. "By the way," Vic continued, "there's a great bar at the hotel where I'm staying for the night. I thought I'd go there, get settled in, and then maybe pop into the bar and see if I can make it so that by the end of the night I can find a girl." I just laughed and shook my head. "Where did you stop?" I asked him. I knew that Vic was probably familiar with the more luxurious places in the Midwest, since that was his territory. My territory is the Northwest, and I only ended up here in Milwaukee because of the vagaries of airline routes from Spokane to the east, or as West Coast locals say, to the east. "Doubletree, my friend," Vic replied. "The best rooms, the best bar, the most beautiful women, basically, the best of everything." I quickly went to the Hilton mobile website on my smartphone to try to book a room at the same hotel where my friend was staying. I was glad that I was able to get a room in the same hotel. Plus, it wouldn't hurt my accumulated Hilton Honors points for staying at this place. Vic and I took a taxi together and reached our destination without much difficulty. We had reservations at the Doubletree Hotel in the city center, just a few blocks from Lake Michigan and closer to the airport than the Brookfield Hotel. An hour later, we were drinking together again in the bar on the ground floor, and from the very beginning of our conversation, Vic suggested that I throw a party for the night. "You know," Vic said with a confident smile, "I could find you the right girl for the night, and maybe for a couple of days if you want." I just looked at him over the glass of drink I was sipping. I saw behind his smile that he was really serious. "Come on, Vic," I replied. "You know I would never cheat on Laurel. After all, why would I trade a steak at home for a hamburger on the road?" "Ah," said Vic with an exaggerated nod of his head, said as a true faithful husband, or perhaps as one who has been completely tamed and domesticated. He didn't say it this time, but I often heard him call the other married members of our team henpecked. "Well," I said, "consider me representative of all such cases. But I don't want to keep you up if you're hunting tonight. Go and enjoy yourself." "Thanks, buddy," Vic replied. "I think I'll do that. Maybe I'll find a woman with such talents that she can turn my world upside down." Vic took out his smartphone and clicked on one of the icons in the application menu. I watched as he tapped the screen a few times and then noticed a window pop up. "You really are a woman hunter, aren't you?" I asked quietly as he manipulated the icons on his phone screen. "You can rest assured, my friend," he drawled, continuing to work. A random thought suddenly came to me. I wondered how Vic could so quickly and easily arrange something as complex, or simple, as sex for such a short period of time by manipulating his smartphone. "This one is good. She's local. She's divorced. Supposedly, and she's affordable. Her preferences are pretty much in line with mine, and the price is right," I heard Vic mutter to himself. He then nodded to himself, closed the screen, put his phone away, and picked up his glass to take a sip. "And that's it?" I asked with considerable surprise in my voice. "No trolling at the bar, no targeting prospects, no clumsy pickup lines or dancing with multiple women to get a feel for them." No paying 3 times the price for watered-down drinks, or lying about the size of your assets and the number of times a night you can stand up. By this time, Vic had raised his hand in a stop sign and was quietly laughing at my display of obvious disbelief. "Dude," my friend chided me, "you just have to join the 21st century. There's an app for everything now, even sex." Pausing for a second, Vic continued, "And women can search for and find suitable sex in the same way." Vic then pretended to furrow his brows in false seriousness, but his lips still retained the remnants of a smile. "Are you telling me that your beautiful foxy geek wife still hasn't convinced you that now you can organize almost everything using a computer or smartphone?" I just shrugged and smiled at my old friend. I didn't have time to answer his question, admitting that Laurel had indeed always kept me informed of the latest developments in technology and mobile applications. After all, it was her specialty in the career she was working in. Vic's phone rang, playing the tune of Joe Cocker's "You Can Keep Your Hat On." He turned for a few seconds to talk. After about 20 seconds of low-voiced discussion, Vic turned back to me, ending the phone call. "Looking forward to it, honey. Be careful on the slippery roads along the way. You hear?" "Uh-huh, bye," Vic said, overemphasizing his southern accent more than I thought necessary. He then put the phone in his pocket, finished his drink, and signaled for another one for both of us. "Well, looks like I got it all set," Vic said. "Tell me, Grady, are you sure you don't want me to set something up for you? After all, what else do brothers do if they don't have each other's backs?" Vic sounded like a fraternity brother. I knew, and I truly appreciated his sentiments, but what he said reminded me at that moment of my own brother Mike. My name is Grady Stone. My brother, Mike Stone, is 2 years older than me. We got along pretty well while growing up in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Except for the 2 years we attended 71st High School together, where he didn't want his style to be ruined by the presence of his uncool little brother. Mike played football in high school while I ran cross-country, so we didn't hang out in the same group. This allowed us to get along better than if I had just tried to hang around Mike as his mini-me. Dad, who served in the artillery brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division, died in Iraq in a non-combat accident. Mike was 14 when we received the news of his father's death, and I was 12. This news hit us all hard, most of all for my mother. Mom stayed in Fayetteville after her father died and the mourning period ended, although her extended family was from Silva in western North Carolina. She had a good job at a well-known real estate company and could move up in the company. Mom started dating again when Mike and I were in college. She was and remains a very attractive woman and had no problem attracting men. But she was very picky, and it took some time before she finally started dating a really nice man named Miles Lanier, a financially very wealthy widower. Despite Mike and I's fears that someone might be trying to take our father's place, when Mom finally introduced Miles to us, we all got along well. By then, Mike and I were old enough and mature enough to realize that Mom deserved to find happiness again, so we supported her in that regard. And while neither Mom nor Miles have given any indication over the past few years that they want to formalize their relationship through marriage, their relationship is still going strong. My father left behind enough commercial life insurance and investments, in addition to the Army Group life insurance, to more than pay for Mike and me through college. Mike decided to attend Duke University in Durham. Mike wasn't accepted into college because of his football skills. He played in high school mostly for fun and prestige, rather than with a career in professional sports in mind. Mike was very disciplined academically and specialized in business with a focus on marketing. He successfully graduated from university and got a job in the marketing department of XLT, a growing software company based in Cary, North Carolina. Cary, by the way, is located near Raleigh, in the western part of the capital, in an area of the state that locals and regional residents call the Research Triangle. Mike's employer, XLT, had only been around for about 10 years when he started working there. It was a rising technology firm specializing in mobile applications for small devices such as tablets and smartphones. Even though we attended rival colleges, Mike and I remained close. He teased me that the Wolfpack basketball team would never see sports glory again and bragged about the Duke basketball program and all their national championships under Coach K. I was just kidding him about how the Wolfpack almost always dominated the Dookies, as I called them Blue Devils, on the football field. Yes, I loved my brother Mike very much, and he reciprocates my feelings. Not long after Mike started working at XLT, he met Marilee Redmond at a company event. Marilee was the date of one of Mike's colleagues that evening, but at that time they were not in any relationship. Mike asked Marilee out on a date later that week. They fell in love within a few months and got married around the time I was entering my 4th year at NC State, majoring in industrial and systems engineering. I didn't have much contact with Marilee and her family before we got married. But Mike told me that the Marilee family was very influential in industry and politics in Winston-Salem. Despite my youth and inexperience, I understood that differences could arise between a girl raised in the high society of a large city like Winston-Salem and a guy raised as the son of a fallen soldier in Fayetteville. However, despite this, they got along very well, and I could see that Mike was deeply attracted to Marilee. She was a beauty and very easy to talk to. Marilee graduated from Wake Forest University right in her hometown with a degree in business and enterprise management. Although she was not as academically prepared as some others, her unique communication style and open personality easily endeared her to people. Marilee was hired by an insurance company with offices in Raleigh immediately after graduating from Wake Forest. Besides, Marilee was very attractive. Shall I say attractive? It would be better to say stunningly beautiful. Her overly friendly nature could, and often was, misinterpreted as flirting when she didn't really mean it. Mike told me more than once that he had to intervene between Marilee and some guy who misunderstood her mood and tried to hit on her. So her personality made her very approachable to the average woman hunter. And Marilee's beauty ran in the family. That's why I was so easily charmed the first time I saw her sister, Laurel Redmond, during Mike and Marilee's wedding preparations. Although Laurel was not as open about her personality as her sister, she was nonetheless just as attractive as Marilee. My recollection was interrupted by the noise of the Doubletree Hotel bartender slamming a case of bar glasses onto the top surface of the bar. "Trust me, Vic, old friend," I replied. "I really understand that you care about me like a real brother." I took a sip of my drink, smiled at my fraternity brother, and said, "But I've stopped looking for fun like that since I hooked up with and married Laurel." Like I said, it was Mike and Marilee's wedding where I first met Laurel, and I've been hopelessly in love ever since. From the rehearsal, wedding, and reception, I couldn't calm my heart from the moment I first laid eyes on Laurel. Of course, she only knew of me as a member of the wedding party for my brother's participation in what her family called my sister's wedding. I also immediately realized that Laurel and her older sister, who were only a year apart in age, were very close in many other ways. They looked very similar and had the same mannerisms and verbiage in their conversations. There were also differences. As the saying goes, Marilee never met a person she didn't know, while Laurel was more reserved in her interactions with people. The Redmond family was very famous for its close-knit and supportive family members. Many politicians, businessmen, or journalists over the last 4 generations of Winston-Salem's history are said to have learned firsthand the consequences of underestimating the influence and money of the Redmond family. Their family solidarity was legendary. So at first, Laurel wasn't particularly receptive to my obvious infatuation. It was only after I spoke to her several times at the reception that she began to show interest in me. In our conversations, I learned that Laurel's love and devotion for her sister easily matched the relationship I shared with Mike. This was confirmed when we walked down the street after the reception. Laurel, feeling the effects of her drinking, opened up a little to me and told me anecdotes about her relationship with her sister. Although Laurel was somewhat reserved in her interactions with people, she was not completely indifferent to what was happening around her. She realized from the age of 14 that she and Marilee were women whom men found attractive, and therefore understood that they were a magnet for local ladies' men. Laurel also told me that she and her sister were so close that they watched each other, sometimes even lying or covering for each other. So they acted the same way Mike and I did, looking out for each other like brothers. For example, Laurel quietly admitted that she pulled Marilee out of a bachelorette party when the situation became threatening and could lead to a sexual encounter with one of the dancers hired by Marilee's fraternity friends. Luckily, Laurel realized what was going on, and Marilee finally agreed with her sister to get out of there before her future happiness with Mike could be ruined before it even began. It turned out that Laurel also attended NC State, and we were both in our 4th year. Naturally, this added fuel to the fire of high school competition within our connected families, adding to the jokes about Mike's Blue Devils and Laurel's Wolf Pack and mine. Fortunately, interschool sports in North Carolina have always been relatively friendly, not as violent as in the Southeastern Conference further south. As I looked out the window of the Doubletree Bar, I noticed that the snowstorm that had started earlier had stopped. I knew that if snow started piling up on the streets of Milwaukee, the plows would make quick work of it. Milwaukee is always well prepared for winter weather. As Vic and I waited for fresh drinks, Vic smiled and responded to my earlier statement. "Well, you may not be in the market, friend, but I'm not ready to settle down yet. And since this status allows me a greater degree of freedom, I choose to use this freedom, so I'm all set for the evening." I remarked, "Yes, and I noticed that it only took you a few minutes to arrange this by simply tapping the phone screen a few times, and then having a 2-minute phone conversation." I admit I was a little curious how he was able to arrange a sex partner for the evening so quickly and easily. He nodded, then lifted his chin, indicating for me to look behind him. When I turned, I saw a couple of women walking through the lobby towards the door leading to the Doubletree Hotel's indoor pool. Both women were attractive and were wearing short robes covering their bathing suits, which they were clearly wearing underneath. "Yes," Vic said as we watched the two ladies move through the lobby, "it was easy to arrange my night with a simple phone call. But even without that advantage, I don't think it would have taken me much time or effort to maybe get one of these girls to take off her swimsuit." I couldn't help but notice that the ladies were really attractive. They were probably in their 20s or 30s, and were probably professional women working in the same business environment as Vic and I did. I also couldn't help but smile at the warm thought that the images of attractive women in swimsuits in the hotel pool brought to mind about my wife, Laurel. I was doubly excited when I learned that Laurel was also attending NC State, majoring in computer science. I studied industrial and systems engineering at State. We were surprised that we didn't recognize each other while on campus together, but realized that we were probably just hanging out with different groups up to this point, and the university population wasn't small. In terms of extracurricular activities, I still ran almost every day, went to classes, and spent time at the Kappa Alpha fraternity house. Laurel hung out with geeks and people from computer labs. Laurel was dedicated to getting good grades as her ticket to a good job after graduation. I learned that Laurel had set high personal and professional goals for her life, seeking to achieve success through honest work rather than relying on her abundance of beauty and family connections. This is despite the fact that she had a trust fund that guaranteed that she would never have to work a day in her life. Laurel swam competitively in high school for 2 years, but now swam to stay in shape and help herself relax from all the mental stress of studying. I love to have fun, and Laurel was career-oriented from the beginning. When we later started dating, I thought a couple of times that her one-sided nature might cause us some difficulties. But her loving attitude when we were alone after we got to know each other overcame these differences in character. Laurel often seemed engrossed in her work. During our time together at NC State, her studies often interrupted the plans I made for us. This annoyed me sometimes as she missed more fraternity house events with me than she attended. Basically, you could say that in some respects we were both geeks. However, Laurel was much more than that. As a computer science major, she loved software development and application architecture. Nobody in the industry called them programmers anymore. They were software developers, and they no longer used the terms lines of code to describe development progress. Now they said object modules. As it turned out, I could understand Laurel's geekiness well, since I could at least follow her conversations about what she did as an architect and software developer. I needed to acquire some basic software development skills before meeting Laurel as a sophomore. This was necessary to automate some of the statistics and operations research methods that I studied later in my third year. This way, I could at least follow the conversations Laurel was having with her fellow computer science students as I sat with them. These minor software development skills, along with a working knowledge of the language, also looked good enough on my resume to get me hired after graduation at Odyssey Corporation. A fortunate turn of fate allowed Laurel to graduate at the same time as me. We started dating in the first semester of our senior year. By the end of the Christmas holidays, I had won her heart. We spent Christmas holidays together at Timberline Ski Resort in West Virginia. I think overall we spent more time in bed than on the slopes. It was there that I learned, much to my delight, that this reserved, geeky girl I was so attracted to could actually be a tigress in bed. We decided by mutual consent, starting from that first night at the resort, to be exclusive to each other from that point forward. On our second night in Timberline, I began to learn a little more about Laurel's family and her background, and it all started with one strange choice of words on Laurel's part. "Yeah, I almost had an accident," Laurel said as I massaged her gorgeous body after dinner. She was lying on her stomach, completely naked. Her head was turned towards me and supported by a folded towel. She watched me through narrowed, cat-like eyes as I gently rubbed the fragrant oil that she had taken with me on the trip into her body. We both had a great time skiing together most of the day, only taking breaks once or twice in the morning. We had lunch at the Timbers Inn and then spent the rest of the day skiing, mostly together, but sometimes separately. We were both experienced enough to handle the moderate trails and the long Salamander Trail. At 2 miles long, Salamander is the longest ski run in the South. Yes, some people even consider West Virginia part of the South. Laurel chose to stay on Salamander in the late afternoon, while I decided to try one of the less scary expert runs. It turned out to be a short track, which was a continuation of the long middle track. Although I survived my attempt to descend the Pearly Glades Trail, falling only once on the icy surface and without sustaining any injuries, Laurel nearly encountered disaster further up the mountain. Some guy on a snowboard rudely crossed the path of a family who was skiing near where Laurel had stopped to take a photo of the breathtaking Cannon Valley, a truly magnificent view stretching out before her. The mother in this family apparently wasn't very good at skiing and overreacted by trying to get away from the guy on the snowboard. She ended up crashing straight into Laurel, who was engrossed in the view and didn't notice the impending impact. "I think," Laurel continued, "it could have caused serious injury to both of us if I had seen her coming and tensed up." I agreed and said, "Yeah, instead you just got a bruise where she hit you. Right? Here." At the same time, I patted her left buttock, beautiful buttock, even despite the bright bruise that was left on Laurel. "What about that woman? Is everything okay?" "Yes," she apologized, Laurel replied. And then I saw and heard her husband screaming insults at a guy on a snowboard as he walked away. The kids were laughing and screaming about how their dad would put his entire salary back into the family, swearing a fine jar. Here she laughed quietly once before continuing. When I heard this family talking about the swearing fine jar, I couldn't help but laugh. We had the same jar at home when Marilee and I were growing up. "Newbies?" I asked, hearing an unfamiliar word. "Yes," Laurel replied. "It's a term my maternal grandfather used. He told us stories about the textile factory where he was a foreman at the time. This was before he went into management and became CEO of the company a few years later. So, it was right after the Great Depression, and the factory started expanding again and hiring new workers. When Grandpa described the new workers in his stories, he called them newbies instead of rookies. It was one of his quirks, I guess." I nodded in understanding. Anyway, Laurel continued. So since none of this family on Salamander looked particularly experienced at skiing today, I called them newbies. It's just a term I heard and used a lot growing up. This was the first of several conversations we had about our families this week, and although the sex that accompanied these conversations was extremely satisfying, I must say that it was during simple conversations with Laurel that I realized by the third day of our stay together that I really loved her. I didn't immediately voice this feeling. 2 days later, Laurel, already awake and obviously watching my face, smiled at me with her dazzling smile as I slowly woke up and said, "Good morning, Grady, my love." This statement quickly brought me out of my sleepy state. "My favorite?" I asked with raised eyebrows and an uncertain smile. "Yes, Grady," Laurel sighed, resting her head on my chest. "My love." From that moment on, we knew that not only were we exclusive to each other, but that it would probably remain that way for the rest of our lives. During spring break, a few months after our ski trip, we formally agreed to get married and spend the rest of our lives together. That summer after graduation, we delighted both families, especially her sister, who was married to my brother, by getting married in the same church where Marilee and Mike had gotten married the year before. My mother joked that the children from both marriages would be double cousins. At my wedding, my brother Mike stood next to me as best man. Vic Pettigrew was also standing next to me. Marilee, Laurel's sister and my sister-in-law, was the senior bridesmaid. One of her bridesmaids was Laurel's childhood friend, a girl named Lydia. Surprisingly, Laurel insisted that we not have a bachelor or bachelorette party before the wedding. I asked her why, but she just said that she had heard and seen too many stories about how such parties lead to infidelity. She reminded me again of what almost happened at Marilee's bachelorette party and how it almost became a disaster. My fraternity brothers were a little disappointed. They wanted to throw me a big farewell party before entering the world of marriage. I found out later that Marilee was also a little disappointed. She wanted to throw a nice party for Laurel and maybe herself, even though she seemed happily married and faithful to my brother. But I gave in to Laurel's wishes, opting instead for a lovely intimate dinner with Laurel, Mike, Marilee, Vic, Lydia, and myself at the same restaurant that had been the Redmond family's favorite spot since the sisters' parents' wedding. We had a wonderful dinner, told stories about each other, some true, most made up, and danced after dinner. It was truly a great time, with the added benefit of no hangover and with clear memories of the night before, without the slightest feeling of guilt the next day and all the days after. When Laurel and I started our life together, we had similar goals and aspirations, but we approached the day-to-day aspects of living together differently. I learned new concepts easily, especially engineering ones. I didn't feel the need to constantly cram books. Laurel, however, seemed to be constantly learning. When she wasn't in the computer lab, she was studying books or the library's online research network. She had to thoroughly research the concept, consult with others, study it, and reflect on it until she recognized that she had mastered it. This habit carried over to her professional endeavors at work. Luckily for our post-graduation situation, Laurel was hired by the same company. My brother Mike worked for XLT Software in Cary and in the same city as my new job, Odyssey. The stars simply aligned for us after graduation and marriage, allowing us to live and work in an area relatively close to where we studied and fairly close to our extended families. Laurel and I found a nice starter home a couple of miles from Mike and Marilee's house. With the help of a down payment from Laurel's parents as a wedding gift, we were set up. My experience in cross-country in high school forever instilled in me a love for outdoor running, especially in the woods, and there were several natural running trails around Cary. Laurel, on the other hand, loved to swim, but was not interested in active outdoor activities, preferring to spend time developing on her computer, which, of course, was a very indoor activity. However, Laurel took breaks from her work from time to swim and relieve stress, allowing the water to relax her brain and find a solution for a specific module she might be having trouble with. After a long swim, she would reach an aha moment. A solution emerged, and her movements in the water accelerated. She continued swimming for at least 10 more laps before exiting the pool, quickly removing her swimsuit if she chose to wear one, of course quickly rinsing off the bleach and returning to her task at the computer. Since Laurel was allowed to work from home via remote connection after her first year in the office, it was not uncommon to find her working absolutely naked after swimming. Laurel worked on her computer, connected to the office network via a virtual private network, oblivious to the world around her and the fact that she hadn't gotten dressed after a quick shower after leaving the pool. She did not allow herself to miss the moment when the solution to the code occurred to her because of such a small thing as the need to get dressed. I've often wondered how a UPS delivery guy would react if he rang the doorbell to get her signature and she ran out looking like that. When I came home and found her working in her mother's clothes, I would grab a beer, quietly enter her office, and just sit there, watching her beautiful naked body in an ergonomic chair. I sat mesmerized, enjoying the magnificent play of her breasts as she typed or controlled the mouse. Eventually, Laurel would reach a transition point, whether it was the completion of a suitable function or procedure, or the development of an interface that combined the best characteristics of two or more different types of objects, classes, or software modules. She raised her clenched fists high into the air in a Rocky movie and spun her chair, turning her magnificent naked body with her breasts raised high above her head. After the second or third turn, when she finally opened her eyes and realized that I was watching her, well, more like openly staring, Laurel immediately fixed her eyes on the tent in my pants. She jumped out of her chair and ran into my waiting arms. Depending on our hunger levels, we would either immediately move on to quenching another thirst, our passion, or we would put it off until dinner. Of course, I insisted that we cook dinner together, without Laurel having to get dressed. Yes, life was wonderful. And then everything changed. My curiosity began to get the better of me as Vic and I were talking and drinking at the Doubletree bar, waiting for his date for the evening. "Hey Vic," I started cautiously, "can you show me this app you use to set up dates? I have to say that I find it a little incredible how easily you manage to arrange all this." "Sure, buddy," Vic replied, reaching for his smartphone. I noticed that it was one of the new Samsung models. Now, before I was allowed to install the app on my phone, I had to be referred by someone to the very private and exclusive service behind it. I raised my eyebrows and Vic nodded and continued. "Yes, this is a recommendation system that helps you get started, something like Good Times in Kappa Alpha, remember? Then you fill out your profile and they verify that you are not a registered sex offender or criminal and that you have a valid online payment system." "Don't ask me how they do it all," Vic continued, "because I just don't know. The site then wirelessly downloads the application to your mobile device via cellular connection, whether it's your smartphone or tablet, or even both, usually within a week after completing your profile." "What is the name of this mysterious service?" I asked. "They call it Unter," Vic replied, "kind of like the Uber ride-sharing app." Suddenly, a strange chill ran down my spine as I recognized a familiar metaphor in the words Vic had just spoken. "Unter?" I asked.
Yeah, I think the company running this service wanted to take advantage of the similarities with free market service providers and customers like those Uber drivers and users, Vic said. So they used the German term just like Uber.
Vic then got a sly look on his face and said, "You know, Grady, if you wanted to, let's say, try this, service, or just satisfy your curiosity about how it works. You know, without, well, you don't have to seek the services of some woman or even expose yourself to some horny lady looking for a man." I hesitated for about 3 seconds before I smiled at him and invited him to continue his explanation. "Fine. You know you have to be careful about all this, though, right?" Vic asked me. "Vic, trust me, I can be careful. Do I need to remind you that I never revealed the identity of the scoundrel who rubbed the trees in front of the Sigma Chi house with toilet paper during our semester?" I asked him. He blushed a little and smiled, remembering and seeing that I could actually keep my mouth shut when necessary. Vic continued to talk about the unique service he was a member of. As his revelations continued, My internal alarms became louder and louder. I started to say something to Vic about my acquaintance with what he was describing, but for some reason I hesitated and decided to let him continue. As he spoke, I couldn't help but remember a conversation I had with Laurel about a year ago. Laurel returned home very excited and told me that she had been selected to work on the development team for the new XLT mobile application platform. This was to be the basis for a new web engine that would combine the best features of software, e-commerce, and social networking. Laurel told me that this new application platform will work well on desktops, laptops, netbooks, or tablets, but it will truly shine when used with a smartphone such as Android or iPhone, and will sync almost instantly between any of these types of computing devices if a person uses them in combination. I was happy for Laurel at the time and congratulated her on being chosen to be part of such a cutting-edge development team. We went to Red Lobster to celebrate. However, after a few weeks, I began to regret choosing Laurel for a team that seemed to be heading towards becoming XLT's flagship product. She spent more and more time in the office, even on weekends. When I started complaining that she was often not at home and with me, she promised that this would soon end, and then we could go on vacation together. When I asked my brother Mike what was up with this project, he simply smiled and reminded me that he was working under a non-disclosure agreement with XLT. He just laughed and told me to ask my wife since he works in marketing and really has no control over the development team and their schedule. When Laurel did tell me something about her project, she talked only about the most basic things, just like in the beginning. However, she said that XLT is not really developing a single application, but a prototype platform, a kind of software power tool for others to use in their business models related to online goods and services in many other applications. The application platform also allowed for the development of applications that offered select individual customers a sort of priority or first choice on certain goods or services provided by the company or other entity using the application. This option also allowed these privileged members to opt out of services. This first choice could be based on the established priority for any particular person or on his or her geographic proximity to the one ordering the service or product. The GPS locator feature was especially useful in this regard. XLT would receive royalties from every business, social group, or government agency that purchased a license to use this application platform tool or application engine for lack of a better term. Of course, this would create a lot of work for the intellectual property lawyers who would handle cases for XLT in claims against those organizations that would try to infringe the copyrights and trademarks of products developed by XLT. XLT called this product and service project Zirka. Zirka in German means about or surroundings. When I asked her about it, Laurel explained that the metaphor supports the basis of the app platform's name in the same vein as the increasingly popular online ride-sharing service called Uber, which has been causing hysterics among commercial taxi companies and independent taxi operators. Apps and services like Uber, or those that will soon be using this new and improved Zirka app platform that my wife helped develop, required the use of several new common technologies. They needed GPS navigation services, of course, smartphones or other mobile devices, and a social network with reliable feedback capabilities. The last point was required to establish trust and accountability between clients and service providers. The application platform also required a robust network to process payments and match customer service pairings by location, type, and acceptable business practices. Registered member profiles would be configured to allow either one-time transactions, recurring transactions, or other customizable forms of scheduled transactions. The benefits of a web service, such as the one offered by the Zirka application platform, were clear. A provider of a service or product could charge lower fees than a provider operating under a traditional business model. Then, there were the added benefits of automatic billing, transaction speed, ease of use, computer-based preference matching and accessibility, and guaranteed privacy. Well, mostly. Once the transaction began, the customer and the service or product provider interacted more closely. and if the transaction involved personal interaction in some way, they could become, if not acquaintances, at least more aware of each other. The coincidence is in the details of what my friend Vic was telling me now about this application for hunting for girls, and what my wife had told me a year ago about the Zerka project was becoming too much of a coincidence. My facial expression and tell me more attitude encouraged him to continue. Well, Vic continued, for Unter subscribers, modern technology allows them to connect with suitable companions based on several parameters. An Unter subscriber is required to have a smartphone or tablet computer with an Apple or Android interface. He or she must have GPS navigation enabled on their phone. Now, I know this is of some concern to those concerned about privacy, as the device's location is somewhat exposed when the GPS service is active. The user must also belong to the Unter online social network. It works almost exactly like circles on Google+. He looked at me to make sure I was absorbing what he was telling me. I nodded for him to continue. The smartphone interface and navigation ability allows you to quickly find matches based on geographic proximity at your scheduled meeting time. The social network allows the creation of a profile with an optional photo and mandatory rating and feedback functionality to establish mutually agreed upon pricing, payment terms, and some degree of trust and accountability between clients and those providing sex services. The rating scheme associated with the accountability function includes a star system that rates an encounter from 1 to 5 stars after the event, Vic said. If you do not rate or provide feedback for an event, you will be blocked from the Unter scheduling system until you meet these requirements. That chill that ran down my spine now intensified. The similarities between the application capabilities that Vic described about the Unter service and the capabilities that my wife Laurel attributed to the Zerka project being developed at XLT last year were striking. But of course, Laurel and her company and their products couldn't be associated with an app that was so risky or borderline legal. I expressed my initial observations to Laurel a year ago about her team's early efforts to develop the XLT Zerka application platform, using my best engineering approach to any problem I encountered. She listened and considered what I said with her keen analytical mind. We even discovered that we saw things very similarly. I think the geeks flock together rule applies to my wife and me, just as much as the birds of a feather rule applies. Laurel actually started writing down and typing some of what we talked about in our early discussions about the Zerka project while sitting at her keyboard. She said she appreciated my engineering and business ideas for what she was now describing in terms of pure software development. She particularly liked my proposal for modules that are required to collect consumer or user feedback and factor premium services into the design, as well as my proposal for a feature that takes into account things like special event coverage. For example, if an application using the Zerka platform included an entertainment or ticketing service, then its business rules would need to account for a premium for premium members, requiring special consideration for things such as merchandise, events, group needs, or services associated with calendar events such as Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, and Kwanzaa, or even St. Patrick's Day, West Point Founders Day, and Mardi Gras. Premium membership could also come with the benefit of dynamic pricing protection. For example, if the NC State basketball team, by some strange coincidence, ever repeated the miracle of 1983 and made the NCAA finals in March of any coming year. Haha. Possible problems that I saw with applications based on the Zerka project included a general lack of regulation of applications based on it, the possibility of sensitive information being leaked from within, and the need to provide protection from external threats to the business. Cybersecurity is always a concern, especially with so much personally identifiable information, or PI, available to a determined cybercriminal. Also, old ways die hard, and usually they go to fight. I reminded her of the legal and regulatory challenges that taxi companies and independent cabs, or gypsy taxis, have been making across the S in an attempt to keep Uber from destroying their way of life under the old commercial transportation model. Some commercial taxi operators have even been known to vandalize the vehicles of those they identify or even suspect as Uber operators. The use of this type of online mobile service was also quickly becoming part of the repertoire of criminal enterprises. If the service or product operated in that shady area, I reminded Laurel that there would always be threats from law enforcement, as well as threats from shady competitors. This was especially true for those doing business in a new technological field but conforming to the old-school criminal model, including the violent elimination of competitors through intimidation or elimination. If someone was intentionally, or even accidentally, starting an online venture that was moving into Carmine territory, so to speak, he or she could expect a visit from Salvador and Guido. These days, however, they might even receive visits from Ramon and Enrique, or even Janos and Dimitri, with the expansion of criminal enterprises in America stemming from Latin American and Eastern European families. In fact, ethnic gang activity was getting so bad these days that I jokingly told Laurel that I wouldn't be surprised if someone in a dark parking lot ran into Sven, Lars, and Ragnar any day. Then there were the issues of ensuring security for network members from attack, theft, or blackmail, and subpoenas in any legal proceedings that might arise regarding any unpleasant or perceived harmful consequences of using the service. I now asked Vic, so, tell me a little about the service providers in the background of all this, about the products of Unter's business model, about potential sexual partners. How does the service keep so many of them available? Vic almost shocked me at that moment. He said, service providers are actually local women and girls across the country who sign up with Unter as providers as well as users. They are either hot young professionals or hourly workers who do it for extra income, or maybe they are students trying to offset the cost of their studies. Then he really hit me. Some of the service providers even fall into the category of bored, hot-headed, or just desperate housewives, looking for a little variety in their lives, along with the income that comes from participating in these, social events. Vic continued by saying, I asked questions on the Unter forum and found out that there are also men offering their services on this network to businesswomen who subscribe to the service. I even checked it using the app's search engine. It allows you to specify various search parameters during the discovery process. So, Vic finally asked, you want me to recommend you so you can get in on the business, or at least see what's the matter? I started thanking him and saying no, thinking that I simply couldn't do what he was suggesting. I was too happily married to cheat while away from home on a business trip, and I didn't want to do anything that would jeopardize my current and future happiness with Laurel. But I was curious. I asked Vic, I hear you talking about how this is supposed to, air quotes, work. How does this all really work in practice? For example, how did you use your phone to get the services of a woman for the night here in Milwaukee when you actually live in North Carolina? Vic smiled and said, the GPS feature on my phone tells the Unter app my location and alerts me to candidates within my current geographic proximity who are actively indicating online that they are available. I can also set the app to search for those who typically live and work in any specific geographic area I plan to be in the future, regardless of whether they are currently online or not. This is what the badge looks like. Vic then showed me the app icon he uses for this unique service. The icon was a square with rounded corners. In the center was a large white capital I on a blue background. Vic told me, usually the color around the iota symbol is black. It turns blue, as it does now, only when a heterosexual contract is established between two consenting parties when a man seeks female company. I was instantly confused. I asked him, what does the Star Wars character Yoda have to do with app icon design? Vic laughed and said, dude is the Greek letter iota and is usually pronounced iota. Vic continued to inform me, the women I have met so far as members of the Unter service use a very similar app, but the icon for them is black with the Greek letter lambda in the center. It's sort of like an inverted V. But when one of the women is working, her badge turns a deep pink color, which the women call hot pink. But hey, dude, for men, pink is pink. Do you know what I mean? And, Vic continued, there's even an option for those who play for both teams. If they're setting up this kind of meeting, then their app icon should be some kind of rainbow design. I had a flash of what it might look like in my head. At this point, however, I was approaching the point of information overload. Vic added to this by saying, I even read on a website forum that you can set up meetings for threes or even more. In these cases, the number of participants signed up for the scheduled event is displayed at the bottom of the application icon. I heard enough to know that what Vic was showing me was combined with what I already knew from my experiences with my wife Laurel and her efforts to help other partner companies develop their own specific applications for their niche industries. Let me give you another example, Vic continued. Let's say I want to set up a meeting in the Raleigh area for this weekend. He then double-tapped the screen, giving me real-time comments. I'm just entering one of the zip codes for Raleigh. I saw Vic enter 27607 and hit search. Less than 15 seconds later, his phone screen changed to display a list of more than 10 candidates within a short 5-mile radius of the New Bern Avenue post office on the west side of Raleigh, right next to our home in Cary. Another clue to this mental fusion, as I called it to myself a few seconds ago, was the trademark at the bottom of the search page that Vic showed me. She stated her case clearly and clearly. Unter, a trademark of Star Power Developers, Houston, Texas. Zerka Application Framework, a trademark of XLT Software, Cary, North Carolina. Vic took a sip of his drink a second later, so he didn't notice the look of recognition on my face when I noticed the details of one of the search results highlighted on his phone screen, which lay on the bar between us. He reflected the alias of one of the ladies available in the Raleigh area, one who was available to meet someone for a discreet sexual tryst there that night while I was here drinking with my longtime friend at a bar in Milwaukee, hundreds of miles away. The nickname I saw on Vic's phone screen, Packlover 721, matched perfectly with the email address Packlover721 on our home.com email domain. It was an email address that I was very familiar with. Laurel's development team at XLT began their Zerka project by working with their software architects for a while, and then began developing the common modules that would be needed once the overall architecture was presented to the XLT management team and approved. Then the real development effort began. They linked all application platform interfaces to a database server used as the company's database backend administrators, or DBAs. Then, with the functionality and data connections in place, the graphic artists took on the task of creating a professional yet visually appealing user interface. So now the frame is in place and everyone can relax, right? Ha, if. Not in your life. Phase 2 of all this madness is about to begin. Once the developers were satisfied with the beta version of the app platform, they began sending invitations to development teams from other companies around the country. Then a veritable carnival of app development began, with everyone trying to outdo each other in delivering their desired products and services with the best usability of specific mobile apps they could offer, with XLT receiving a cut from each of them for developing the core application engine behind all of their mobile service applications. When Laurel began to dive so deeply into this new project, I protested to her that she began to come home later when she was working with the XLT development team in person, and stayed at the console longer when working from home. I specifically complained when I noticed that our sex life was starting to suffer. Laurel seemed to take my complaints to heart for a while. This was during the lull between the release of the Zerka platform and the point at which other companies would become familiar enough with Zerka to start developing their own service applications based on it. This lull lasted only about 2 months. And now partnering software development teams with teams wanting to use Zerka's XLT application platform have begun to seek out and engage XLT, asking for one of the original development team members to help with their new applications and services using it. "Oh, Grady, honey," Laurel said to me after we had just finished having sex for the first time in 2 weeks, when she was very busy with one of the client development teams. "I know things are very tense right now, but everything will get better soon, I promise." Come on, Laurel, I said, but not harshly. I may have been born at night, but it was not last night. We both know that this new software platform you're developing is a potential goldmine for XLT, and as such, they will make full use of it. And if that means they screwed all of you developers to make as much profit as possible, then so be it. I just know that they are going to build a portfolio to go public within the next year or so. No, I haven't heard anything concrete about XLT's IPO plans. But as a practicing industrial engineer who consults with new companies and their processes and motivations on a regular basis, I was very familiar with the aspirations and maneuvers in the typical management circles of such companies. And the XLT was starting to match that model almost exactly these days. Well, Laurel said, I don't know about IPOs and things like that, but I know that my leader, Jerry, promised me that this difficult schedule would soon calm down for all of us. This is right after we deal with all these newbies who are using Zerka to get their apps into early development. Newbies, I asked with a slight pause. Then I remembered our conversation some time ago before we got married. You mean like recruits? Laurel laughed and said, Yes, Jerry assigned me to help a team of mobile app developers from a company in Texas so that they could get our help. They may be new at this, but they seem to have everything under control. And I don't know exactly what they're developing yet, but they've gone to great lengths to attract serious talent. That night, we didn't talk about business anymore. In fact, the only sounds we made were moans, little cries, giggles, and sweet words. The next day, Laurel and I again entered a period where we were unable to relax in the evening and then have spontaneous sex. It wasn't always Laurel's fault. I also started going on business trips more. But during the times when I was home, Laurel would come in later and more tired than either of us would have liked. But we just hoped that this period would not last long and that everything would return to normal soon. An anticipated Houston development team has leased office space at Regue's on Center Green Way in Cary. This group, called Star Power Developers, was developing some special, top-secret application for smartphones and tablets and requested development support from XLT, for which they paid upfront. Everyone at XLT who helped them implement the XLT application platform and customize it for the needs of Houston developers was required to maintain confidentiality and signed a special ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Laurel was obviously very excited to work on this new project, and she became even more excited when the project team from Texas actually came to our area and began work. She was especially excited to work with Cameron Whittington, a prominent rising star in the software development world at large and a prominent member of the Houston team. Cam was extremely talented and innovative in the field of software development, having been educated at California Polytechnic University. The only thing I personally didn't like about all of this was that Cam was also a very handsome and charismatic guy. Not only was he single, but he flirted quite a bit with the ladies, even in public areas around the office and at social gatherings with spouses or significant others that XLT hosted for teams visiting using their new Zerka software engine. Cam never seemed to cross the line, but he came damn close. Much to my displeasure, Laurel, quite naturally, had to remain silent about the details of her work in our conversations after she signed a special non-disclosure agreement for the team that arrived. I had previously heard a lot of praise for Cameron Whittington, as well as some general details of her work. But suddenly, mentions of the project and the work of Cam and his team stopped. I didn't realize this shift in the rhythm of conversations at the time, or my wife's need to work in the Whittington team offices late into the evening more often until much later. Concerns about the possible stability of my marriage now began to develop in my mind as my conversation with Vic Petitrew continued in Milwaukee. I finished my drink and turned down the next one Vic had offered, as well as any adventure Vic might have arranged for me through his smartphone and his special membership in this unter dating service. I took the elevator to my room and thought about the consequences of what I had learned that evening until 2 o'clock in the morning. Then fatigue finally overtook me. But before I finally fell asleep, I couldn't help but think about what I saw on my friend's phone screen. I knew for a fact that the email address my wife Laurel used for her non-business communications was packlover721 on our home email domain.com. It just couldn't be what it seemed. Or could it? Could it really be that my wife Laurel is involved in this high-tech affair? Was she some kind of cyber call girl? My last thought before falling asleep was that I needed more information, and I needed Vic's help. The next morning, I went to the Doubletree restaurant before Vic. I finished my eggs, sausage, and hash browns. In the North, the client receives hash browns instead of porridge for breakfast. Then Vic entered. I noticed that Vic had a slightly bleary-eyed look, indicating that he had not gotten enough sleep, probably for a different reason than I did. The corners of his mouth turned up slightly at the start of what would probably become some kind of wide smile by the end of breakfast. My prediction was confirmed when he saw me. I chuckled softly at his expression. Despite my own concerns that my personal situation at home might be deteriorating, Vic seemed to be doing great on the road. "Wow, buddy," Vic said, sitting down and taking the obligatory cup of coffee that was handed to him by a passing waitress. As she turned to go back to the counter, he continued, "That girl last night, wow." I waited while he mixed 3 cups of cream and 6 packets of sugar into his cup of coffee and drank the disgustingly mixed stuff. I drank my coffee black and couldn't understand how someone could put so much crap in their coffee and still claim to enjoy it. "So, I take it that the girl was satisfactory?" I asked. Then he raised one hand and said, "I'm not asking you to kiss and tell, mind you. I understand that a gentleman does not act like that." Vic looked at the clearly visible buffet and said, "No, it's okay. I don't mind telling you. Firstly, she was not that young, she was in her 30s, and her husband was a doctor who was also an avid sled dog racing enthusiast." I was stunned. Her husband. I thought I heard you say she was divorced, and I could not continue what I wanted to say at that moment, so I grabbed my coffee mug and took a long sip. I immediately regretted it because I didn't notice that the waitress came and refilled my coffee. I have to say she gave me a burn. I coughed and reached for ice water after spilling some coffee, putting the mug down too quickly to cope with the sore throat. When I finally calmed down from the scalding heat of the coffee, I leaned closer and almost hissed the following comment to my friend, "I can't believe you." "Hey, buddy," Vic said. "I didn't know she was still married until we talked in the shower this morning before she got dressed to leave. She left this part of her profile a little vague when I checked it online before confirming the appointment. If I had known that she was still married, I would not have arranged the meeting. I have principles about cheating on a spouse of any gender. I will absolutely never cheat on my wife when I finally get married, and I will not tolerate her doing it, and I will not even tolerate anyone we associate with if they do it. I remember growing up with joint custody between my mom and dad," Vic continued. "It was a pure hellish place, and I will not contribute to this, not if I can prevent it." "So why do you have such a satisfied smile on your face?" I asked. "Hey," Vic responded with his own form of pragmatic logic. "I did not find out about her marital status until she left this morning. But before that, the sex was just amazing, and she was too. No matter how hard I tried, being a healthy man, I simply could not help but acknowledge his logic at the moment." We finished breakfast, and Vic had an hour left before he had to leave for a meeting downtown. I had about 3 hours before boarding my new flight at Mitchell Airport, which was only a half-hour drive from here. So I asked my friend to help me as I was starting to be bothered by some unexplained things in my own marriage, starting with the surprising similarities between the projects my wife had been working on recently and the app Vic showed me last night, as well as what I saw on his phone. "Vic," I said, "you know that Laurel and I are happily married and that I would never cheat on her, right?" "Yes," Vic replied, "and I'm sure she'll never cheat on you." He must have noticed something in my expression at that moment, because he immediately frowned and said, "Isn't it true?" I took a deep breath and said, "I hope not. I mean, I have no proof that she is cheating, and she gave me no reason to think that she was not happy in her marriage to me." Unusually for Vic, He remained silent as I continued. But there's just something. I stuttered. I can't figure out what it is yet, but something is wrong. Here I took another sip of my coffee. This time it was a little cooler so I could enjoy it without burning my throat. But my feelings of anxiety started right after you showed me that app last night, I said. Vic sat up straight, and his eyebrows rose to his hairline. Before he could answer, I continued. I've decided that I want you to recommend me to this Unter service as a potential member, I told my stunned friend. I need, to check something carefully. Are you going to try to solve your marriage problems by going after girls? Vic said sarcastically. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. No, I replied. I'm not going after girls, just information. I have to admit, I had to put on an Oscar-caliber acting performance Wednesday night when I finally got home from picking up my car from the RDU parking lot. Laurel welcomed me home with a hot kiss, and after I told her I had an early dinner at the Milwaukee airport before landing, she dragged me into the bedroom for a steamy makeout session before we went to bed for the night. I refrained from saying anything about the doubts that had begun to form in my mind over the past day or two. Even though it had been a long day of traveling, followed by intense sex before bed, I still couldn't fall asleep until I looked at the clock on my bedside table for the last time at 2:30. I just got an answer, Vic told me a week later. It was a message that you had been verified and pre-qualified, and that you would be sent an email with an active link to access the Unter website. Once you get there, you can start filling out your profile. Remember, Vic continued, the app won't download to your phone until you create a profile, and they do a more thorough background check on you and record your credit card information. Thank you, Vic, I said to my friend. Remember, no one needs to know about this. No one, especially Mike or Laurel. A few days ago, I told Vic in Milwaukee that there were some things that might just be a weird coincidence, so I didn't want to cry wolf if it was all just a coincidence. But I just needed to check it out to calm my thoughts. Yes, I understand, Vic replied. I hope this is all just a wild goose chase, my friend. I'd hate to think that Laurel... Well, you know... Yes, I assured him. I understand. Me too. See you. I pressed the end call button on my phone and returned to my desktop computer monitor. Surprisingly, when I checked my email client, I already had an auto-reply message from the Unter service. I clicked on the active link. I know I shouldn't click on active links in emails to avoid falling for scammers. But this was a case where I deliberately ignored this warning about bad information security practices. It took me relatively little time to create my Unter profile. I think I spent 30 minutes filling out all the questions online. Most of the information they wanted initially was typical contact information and the minimum credit card information required for billing. Then the questions became more personal. The questions about my sexual and relationship preferences were actually quite harmless. I have to say that I was a little surprised. I have read the disclaimer and warning about following the rules, especially about timely, post-event evaluations. When I finished, a message appeared on the screen stating that once the profile information was verified, the Android version of the Unter application would be downloaded to my HTC smartphone. This may take up to a week. In fact, it only took 2 days. When the app arrived in the morning, I saw a download complete icon at the top of my phone's home screen. When I lowered the notification screen, I saw an indicator that I needed to click on the OK button to complete the download. I did so, and the Unter application icon in the form of a white iota on a black background appeared on the second screen of my Android. My home screen was already filled with icons for the apps I used regularly. This suited me. This kept the Unter icon out of my home screen so it wouldn't be noticed by accident. Okay, now I have an application. What's next? Finally, I had to admit to myself that at this stage, I really had no idea what to do next. Meanwhile, my relationship with Laurel was still progressing quite normally. Even though we were both busier at work than the previous year, we actually spent more time together after I returned from a recent trip to Spokane. I saw no signs of changes in Laurel's work or daily home habits that would indicate a change in her schedule. I did not see any changes in her behavior that could indicate a change in her attitude towards me or her feelings towards me. Oh yeah, and the sex was still mind-blowing. Honey, Laurel said one evening, about a week after my new smartphone app arrived, Mom and Dad want us to come visit this weekend. Do you have any plans that could stop this? Laurel looked at me with that sweet, expectant smile on her face that I had become accustomed to. I adored those 2 or 3 little freckles on either side of her nose that were the only spots of color on her otherwise smooth and gorgeous face. She waved her hand to remove an unruly strand of her shiny brown hair with subtle highlights. No, I don't have any plans for the weekend. I think it will be really nice to see Hawk and Daisy this weekend, I said with a smile. The 2-hour drive to Winston-Salem was uneventful. The weather cooperated, and it looked like it would be a great weekend. Hawk, Laurel's father, gathered all the necessary materials to grill the meat until it was deliciously edible, as he did once a month. Daisy, Laurel's mom, made all the other initial preparations. By midday, it all began in the backyard of the imposing Redmond estate to borrow from an old Batman TV show. In fact, it was a very beautiful house, only a little too big for my tastes, and it must have been difficult to keep it clean without the services of a housekeeper, which I knew Daisy used. I began to notice that something was a little off with Laurel and her interactions with her sister, my brother's wife, Marilee. This also seemed to affect Daisy's overall well-being. My brother, Mike, and I chatted with Hawk Redmond while the old man grilled and we sipped beer. I don't remember what we talked about, but at some point I noticed that Laurel and Marilee were talking, but their conversation seemed far from relaxed. These two sisters have always seemed almost like twins to me since I first met them. Their physical characteristics were almost identical, although Marilee was slightly taller. On this day, they both wore gray women's trousers. They also wore blouses that were similar in cut, if not color, showing their similar taste in casual clothing. I noticed that although they spoke quietly so as not to be heard, their body language screamed anger. Later, while I was urinating in the downstairs bathroom, I heard Laurel and Marilee walk past the closed door, still engaged in an emotionally charged conversation. I could only hear vague sounds until they came straight to the bathroom door. Then I was able to catch one very clear phrase from one of them, although I could not determine from whom exactly. You better think about this carefully. Infidelity is simply not an acceptable path, and you know it. And then they walked past the door, and I couldn't hear them anymore. By the time I dried my hands and opened the bathroom door to look at the two sisters to see who was talking to whom, they had already walked down the hallway and out onto the patio. I reached into the back right pocket of my pants and pulled out my smartphone. I walked into the empty library across the hallway and woke up my phone from its electronic sleep by tapping the Unter app icon. I needed to check something. I knew Laurel always carried her phone with her. I used the search discovery tool to determine if there were any Unter followers nearby. It took about 20 seconds for the list to show at least 6 available female users within a 10-mile radius of where I was. I recognized one username among them. My mood began to deteriorate before my anger rose. I pressed the map button. Yes, the username of interest was highlighted with a pop-up window and a pointer indicating its exact location at that moment. Packlover 721 was in the same place on the map where I was standing. She is here. You're too quiet, honey, Laurel told me when I drove back to Carrie on Sunday afternoon. Are you okay? Uh-huh, I said casually. I'm afraid my thoughts were still running around everything I had learned so far, and I wasn't paying much attention to my wife. Trying to distract myself so as not to reveal my worries, I decided to change the topic. Are you and Marilee okay? It seemed to me that there was some coolness between you this weekend. Laurel turned and looked straight ahead, her expression feignedly indifferent. Yes, everything is fine. Sometimes her sense of humor can irritate me. Oh, I said, well, as close as you two have always been, I'm sure this little fight won't last long." Laurel didn't respond with words, but shrugged and sighed. She then turned the lever to recline the seat and rested her head on the headrest, closing her eyes, which could simply be a nonverbal signal that she wanted to rest or a way to avoid further conversation. As we sipped wine after dinner on Monday night, Laurel told me that she would be helping another software development team for the next week, and possibly longer. "This may cause me to be late a few times over the next couple of weeks," Laurel said. "The guys who come want to see how to use the Zerka framework to create a mobile app to find the lowest price for gas in a given geographic area." Laurel sighed and continued. "This has been done many times before, but I guess when newbies like these guys are just starting out, they let their excitement at the idea overwhelm their willingness to do basic research on possible competition." Then she looked at me and asked, "What?" Obviously, I allowed myself to smile when I heard her use the term newcomers to describe the efforts of this young and energetic new software company and its aspiring developers. "Nothing, honey," I said. "I hope you can help them get up to speed quickly. I've been putting this off for 2 weeks since the Unter app downloaded to my smartphone. Other than that search mode, which I only ran once in Winston-Salem the previous weekend, I didn't explore any of the app's other features. I was chatting with Vic when we met in the break room at Odyssey when he gave me insight into the Unter app that I didn't even know I needed. Dude, when I first start looking for potential candidates, I just use the flirt feature, Vic told me. When I looked at Vic with that look on my face that said, "What the hell are you talking about?" he grinned and continued. "Dude, this app is kind of Ashley Madison on the go," Vic explained, referring to a well-known service that scandalously and openly specializes in promoting online romances on the side. You can go into flirt mode, and it will open up a sort of chat room, and I think it really is a chat, my friend told me. "You haven't made a date yet, so you haven't yet crossed the line of physical cheating. You're just using this feature to get to know each other a little better online, to get to know each other a little better beyond what's on your Unter profiles, especially since you told me that neither of you have a current photo yet. I've been thinking about this all day." That evening, I remembered that Laurel had said that she would be home much later than usual due to working with that new team that was temporarily in town. I grabbed some chicken from Popeye's on the way home so I wouldn't have to cook. I was sitting in the living room after throwing out the trash after dinner. My phone was lying on the armrest of the soft chair in which I was sitting. I was thinking about what Vic said about the flirt feature in the Unter app. Did I really want to do this? What will I learn if I do this? What would be the outcome if I found out that something was really wrong in my relationship with Laurel? I knew that, as part of her job, Laurel would often sign up to use some service for which she was helping a software company develop an application. This allowed her to immerse herself in the application's interface and functionality so she could better evaluate how the new company implemented XLT's Zerka framework. She could also offer useful recommendations on functionality and presentation elements that could help young developers improve the application, either before its release or shortly after it. Could it be that Paclover 721 is simply Laurel's involvement in aspects of Unter's development and does not actually indicate her actual participation in online sexual encounters with strangers? Could it be something so harmless? Well, how harmless can you be when it comes to an app like this without losing yourself in the questionable morality behind it? I took my smartphone and touched the Unter app icon to launch the program. I ran the search again, but active female users in the area did not show Paclover 721 as active nearby. On a whim, I pinched the screen using my fingers, swiping my thumb and forefinger across the screen. The map zoomed out to show me over 20 small pink buttons representing female users throughout the region. I did a specific search on Paclover 721, and the map zoomed in on the southern part of Durham, about 15 miles from our home in Cary. I was looking for more information about the exact location of the user Paclover 721, and the app returned the address of that location. A quick check on Google Maps showed me the location of this address. It was the Doubletree Suites, I activated the flirt feature with an invitation to chat with Packlover 721. I created a profile with the help of Vic, which helped me look like someone from afar. I pretended I was from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and chose the nickname Sooner 8 than 888. Vic told me that women like to see 8 in their username. My thoughts about that conversation were interrupted by a response to my invitation from Packlover 721. My heart began to pound in my chest as I took a deep breath and read what was on the screen. Packlover 721, did you knock? I do not have much time. On a date, but he's late. Sooner 8 than 888. I saw your profile. Interested. In the area for a couple of weeks. Packlover 721. Wait a minute. I was looking at the screen, and the cursor in the text box was just blinking as I sat there for what seemed like an hour, but was actually only about a minute and a half. Packlover 721. Your profile is short. Recent membership date. First time. Sooner 8888. Yes, first time on the phone. But no, first time for this. I decided to make her think that I was a player who was only now getting help in my hunting business, thanks to the use of a mobile online network for all this. Packlover 721. Well, welcome to the 21st century and the era of high-tech phone sex. Sooner 8888. That's it. This Unter app is truly amazing. Packlover 721. Wait until you get used to some of its advanced features. You'll really appreciate the elegance of the app once you learn more about its intricacies. Now it sounded like a press release about the Unter app, even though my brain was trying to convince my heart that it was really someone other than my wife, Laurel. This online chat was increasingly sounding like the boasting of a proud software developer. Yes, it reflected the mindset of someone who was delighted by the fact that his software development efforts make it easier for him to cheat. And she does this using an app that is a product of her own high-tech skills. Sooner 8888. New to this, sorry if I'm clumsy. Packlover 721. Everything is fine. I enjoy teaching beginners. I froze when I read this and simply turned off my phone, taking a deep sip of wine from the glass next to me. I just shook my head and quietly said to the empty house, "Damn." I was sleeping when Laurel finally came home after midnight. I think I was so emotionally exhausted from all this that it also affected my physical state. The first thing I realized when she got into bed was how the alarm clock went off at 6 in the morning. I was just talking to my brother on the phone right after giving a quick morning report to my boss about plans for my next trip to Spokane. After all, my job still required my presence and effort on behalf of Odyssey clients, despite the personal challenges I was experiencing. Now this morning, I just needed to talk to my brother and let him know what might be going on and how I feel about it. He has been my biggest support person in life and has always been the best male conversation partner for life issues that I have needed to resolve in the past. I really hope I'm wrong, Mike, I responded to his statement. But there are too many coincidences for this to be just an accident. I mean, when you consider how the service works, the branding of the company on the screen, the username for the subscriber here in the Raleigh area, and even the manner in which she chooses and uses words. I stopped to collect myself before I got too emotional, either angry or sad or both. I need to find out, I said with confidence and determination, and I want you to help me. Hey, my brother, you know I'll help you in any way I can, Mike responded, then paused for a few seconds. But you know this will also affect my marriage. I mean, if you and I are somehow involved together in exposing something that could negatively impact Laurel, well, merrily, damn it, the entire Redmond clan will attack us with fire and malice, regardless of her innocence or guilt. You understand that, right? The consequences of his words hit me like a blow. Damn, Mike, I told him. I don't want my problems to get you in trouble. I mean, with you and Marilig, or with both of us and Hawk and Daisy. I was talking about how our mutual relatives, the Redmonds, would react to all of this if it all went south, and at the moment it looked exactly like this. Knowing Hawk Redmond, Marilee, and Laurel's father, it won't be pretty, especially for Mike and me. Well, you know they won't let their children suffer in any way, even if it's just embarrassment over some sexual indiscretion. Here Mike was channeling the airy, stereotypical voice of a grand southern dame. It's just, deep breath, not done in our circles. Despite the seriousness of the situation, we both laughed at his cartoon. Well, I guess I need to get some support for both of us. We'll need corroborating evidence from someone other than you and me if this really goes awry. What it looks like right now, I added. How about we get Vic to help? Mike first met Vic at my graduation ceremony and then again at Laurel and I's wedding. He also knew Vic from several of my company's social events that I hosted at my place involving Mike and Marilee. Yeah, I think that might work better. Here he paused and sighed, saying, damn, just damn. So here we are, 3 weeks later, at the Raleigh Marriott City Center, room 312. Mike and I stood in the main part of the room, just off the short lobby, nervously awaiting the dreaded knock that would mark the beginning of the end of the marriage. Vic Pettigrew, our designated witness and cameraman, seemed more relaxed compared to Mike and me. He held the video camera in his hand, set to standby mode. I'll really be glad when your Odyssey travel days are over, Laurel had told me 2 nights earlier. Mimicking a South Jersey accent similar to Marissa Tomei's as Mona Lisa Vito in My Cousin Vinny, Laurel stomped her foot and said, my body clock, stomp, ticking, stomp, what's that, stomp. I looked at Laurel with very wide eyes after her comment. Do you really want us to start a family? I was somewhat surprised. What about all the exciting things you're up to in your software development business? I thought your job was all the excitement you needed in life right now. I guess I said the wrong thing because Laurel frowned. In fact, the look in her eyes showed that my words had hurt her. Grady, she said quietly, while I really enjoy what I do at XLT, you should have realized by now that work is not my main source of excitement. Now she really looked upset. Don't you feel more excited about our marriage? The question, which came out of nowhere and came amid my suspicions of my wife's possible infidelity, made me hesitate for a moment. I was about to answer, but Laurel had already turned and gone upstairs to bed without a word. Later, when I came to bed, Laurel seemed to be asleep, but I really couldn't be sure. At that moment, I realized that I was going to solve the situation caused by my suspicions once and for all, and soon. Although we weren't having as much fun as usual the next day, Laurel and I were able to talk and exchange love yous before we left her to work and me ostensibly to RDU for a pretend trip to Spokane. The 3 of us waiting in the hotel room repeatedly rehearsed how things would go when she arrived. I had to look her straight in the eye and challenge her presence, trying to do it without making threats. That would have been difficult for me because I just wanted to know why she felt the need to cheat. I mean, it should be more than just beta testing the software until the very end. But Mike and Vic have already assured me that the why of all this will be known if and when the lawyers take up the case. Mike was there for moral support and to serve as a family witness. And Vic, as I said, was supposed to serve as an independent witness and also record everything that happened. We wanted everyone who might be concerned later to understand and see the irrefutable video evidence. Firstly, that the event actually happened, and secondly, that no one was violent towards her after that. This second was especially important because the lawyer I contacted told me that it is common for the wife to allege her husband's abusive or violent nature in such cases, especially when initially confronted with accusations of infidelity. Although we had discussed this several times and were confident that we could handle our roles for the evening, my heart still sank in my throat, and I froze for a moment when there was finally a knock on the door. Mike put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed. I looked at him, and he nodded at me grimly. I reached for the doorknob. Holding back my tears, I took a deep breath, pressed the handle, and quickly opened the door, stepping aside to let her walk inside. And everything went as we expected. Almost. The wife, who had lost her way, saw the door open in front of her and pasted a fake seductive smile on her face, walking into the room with a sexy gait, passing by the man holding the door in the dark lobby. As the door closed behind her and she looked around, seeing three grim but familiar faces in the room, her smile disappeared and was replaced by an expression of pure horror. "Oh," was the only sound she could make for a few seconds, realizing that she was now in a world of trouble. Then she began repeating, quietly at first and then louder as tears welled up in her eyes, "No, no, 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 no. You fucking cheating bitch," growled at the deceived husband. "Oh man, I'm really sorry, brother," said the sad and disappointed but supportive brother. "Bitch," the friend said to both brothers, who, despite all the emotional turmoil that was happening, still continued to film everything that happened. Mrs. Stone will revert to using her maiden name, Redmond. Since there are no children in this union and no children are expected, child support is not required. Since the wife's income is actually slightly greater than the husband's, and she has significantly more assets under management, and the husband has waived any claim despite this imbalance, alimony or asset reallocation is not required from either party. The judge went on and on, seemingly as we sat there waiting for the final result. With the final blow of the gavel, the judge declared the marriage of Mr. Stone and, now, Miss Redmond dissolved. In the hallway after that, I still had tears in my eyes. I couldn't help myself. After all, divorce is such a heartbreaking event, and not only for the divorcing parties, but also for their families and close friends. Mike and I spoke quietly with Mom, Miles, and Vic, along with our lawyer. I glanced at the Redmond group and saw Hawk and Daisy Redmond holding a court of sorts in the hallway. Even though their daughter was a cheating bitch, they were simply not going to let the story unfold the way it did in the courtroom, in such a tasteless manner. I was sure they would get their PR person involved in all of this very quickly. The two sisters hugged and cried as their parents spoke with the lawyer Hawk had hired for his daughter's case. I tensed up when Laurel finally moved away and began timidly approaching our group. Our quiet conversation stopped when she approached. "Grady," she said plaintively as she approached me, "you know I'm really sorry about all of this." Finally, looking at everyone else next to me, Laurel continued, "And Margaret, this is to my mom. I know it hurt you and Miles, as well as Grady and Mike." She sobbed, wiped her nose with the handkerchief she was holding, and said, "Grady, can you ever forgive me? And you too, Mike." Mike frowned at Laurel and partially looked away without answering. He hadn't spoken to Laurel or even her mother at the moment. During the trial, it was revealed that both Laurel and her mother found out about Marilee's infidelity as well as her recent infidelities and confronted her, but did not tell Mike anything. I looked at Laurel and said, "Yes, Laurel, I already told you that I forgive you." She looked at me with an expression of awakening hope. I continued talking. "But you knew what Marilee was doing, and you didn't tell me. Or Mike. What kind of loyalty was this supposed to show?" I asked. Laurel started to get angry, but controlled herself, quietly replying, "It was the same loyalty to my sister that you always showed to your brother. Look, Grady, I know I should have said something sooner, but I was just too surprised by what was happening, and everything seemed to be happening too quickly for me to stop and think about it. And anyway, Marilee and I always looked out for each other. When I showed her the Unter app a couple of months ago, Marilee showed such interest that I thought she was just proud of her sister and what I was doing in the world. So when she asked me to recommend a service to her to get more details to show off her smart sister's work, I'm afraid I believed it, not thinking that she would actually be involved in it before cheating on Mike." She continued, "About a month ago, when the XLT development team conducted an online audit of other companies' applications using our Zerka framework, my boss asked me to review the results. I was pleasantly surprised to see that the framework was very popular. I was proud to be part of a team that was making software development history of sorts while generating decent profits for my company. But when I was checking the logs and looked at the log extract from Star Power's Unter application, and noticed the username Packlover721, I almost fainted. I didn't tell my boss," Laurel continued, and I wasn't going to tell you until my emotions calmed down. So I did what I always do in these situations. I talked to my sister. At this point, Laurel sighed before continuing. Marilee, I think, felt sorry for me and my experiences. I could see that she was very embarrassed, but she finally admitted to me that she was a user named Packlover721. She was trying to use my email name as some kind of camouflage. Not a very good camouflage, if you ask me, I interjected. I mean, she had to know that I would recognize that nickname as being very similar to your email address. What was she thinking? Laurel took a deep breath and said, she thought you weren't the kind of man who would sign up for such web services. She wasn't afraid you'd ever see that username. Well, she was wrong, isn't she? I answered. She was wrong about a lot of things. Everyone was silent for about 30 seconds before Laurel said, I was wrong too. I realized that I shouldn't have hidden it the way I did. I mean, Laurel looked miserable as she continued to get it off her chest. You're my family now, Grady. I married you and promised you my devotion on our wedding day, and I shouldn't have lost sight of that. God, I loved her. But I was still angry and hurt because my brother was absolutely destroyed by Marilee's betrayal, and I was still furious that Laurel hid the truth from me and therefore from Mike. Well, I finally said, turning to my brother, Mike, I love you, brother. Let me know what else I can do to help. Mike simply nodded into space, making it clear that he heard me without turning around. Turning to the right, I said, Mom, Miles, be careful when returning to Fayetteville. It seems there are always roadworks going on between here and there these days. We will, darling. Mom hugged me first, then hugged Mike, who let out a suppressed sob before letting her go and turning away completely to hide her shame at this unmanly display of emotion. Then, when Miles shook my hand, Mom hugged Laurel. She and Laurel both sobbed loudly, which lasted about a couple of minutes before her mom pulled back and looked at her face. Now, you and Grady will be sure to take this counseling seriously so that you both can overcome what your sister caused. After all, I want to count on grandchildren from the two of you in the near future. Yes, we went to counseling together because Laurel had withheld important information about her sister's sexual activities outside of her marriage in the weeks leading up to all of this at the Marriott. Although we had only attended sessions together twice, I had already learned to forgive Laurel as I began to understand that the depth of her relationship with her sister mirrored the one I had always enjoyed with my brother Mike. I also asked her about her long time spent with visiting development teams, particularly with that Texas team and its charismatic leader Cam Whittington. Laurel assured me that the time was truly spent on legitimate work and not on any inappropriate social activities. Regarding possible sexual antics between Cam and Laurel, she assured me that Cam would most likely want to court me rather than her. It seems that Cam Whittington has become something of an expert at deflecting suspicion about his true sexual preferences by perfecting his talents for flirting with the women he has worked with. We were booked in for our third session 4 days later, and learned from all this. Remember, Mom continued, it's not just the couple directly involved in infidelity who suffers from these things. It also affects other family members they love and who love them. I will, Margaret, Laurel said, sobbing. Then my wife turned to me and took my hand. Can we go home, honey? My wife asked me softly. I've been so stressed out about all the court cases that I feel the need to swim a few laps to relieve the stress. Now, my normally shy wife wouldn't try to give any hints of sexuality in such a situation. But given all the events of the last few weeks, I was well aware that she and I hadn't made love since the big reveal at the Marriott. I looked at her face and saw, in addition to her expression of regret, what could have been a sparkle in her eyes. As this aspect of her appearance struck me at that moment, my thoughts went back to the last time I returned home and found Laurel working naked at her workstation after swimming. I simply said, let's go home. End. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.